Hello again, everybody. My name is Jordan Hermany. I am one of MLive's political reporters, and we're here to take you through a rundown of this last week in Michigan politics. It was a doozy. We had conventions, we've had gubernatorial financial filings, we've had ballot proposals that are headed to court, and we have about a half an hour to take you through all of that. So don't want to waste too much time, but we will be accepting questions if you have any regarding any of the topics at hand, or even if you have questions regarding top issues in the gubernatorial debate or any other political questions that we may be able to weigh in on. But I'm joined here today by Ben Orner and Simon Schuster. We're all part of MLive's political team. And I guess, Ben, if we could just start off from the top. Ben, you and I covered the Republican convention this past weekend. Simon, you and I covered the Democratic convention the week before then. And given that it's the most recent one, Ben, if you want to start with the the conservative convention that took place in Lansing this past weekend, it was a bit of an interesting day, would you say?
Yeah, so at the convention, so what a convention is delegates from every county across the state come together to vote on certain nominees in the party. We have lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and then some other like university boards kind of thing. Most of it is ceremonial because the party had already endorsed a lot of these folks, but it's a big show of party unity. And unfortunately, it got off to a rocky start. The thing was only supposed to be 2 or 3 hours. They, in it around 10, out of it's like 12. But the Macomb County delegation, there were about 200 Republican delegates from Macomb County outside Detroit. They made a ruckus because that county has kind of split into two factions, and a more conservative faction was kind of disavowed by the Republican Party. That Macomb County Republicans had two conventions. The I would guess more mainstream Republicans were the ones who were recognized for the convention, who were actually the delegates who were seated. The more conservative ones showed up and sort of like made a ruckus, and there was a motion on the floor. And basically it took about 2 hours for this process where enough delegates across the state voted to replace the Republican Party's delegates from Macomb County. So that was a big ruckus that went on. But after that, things kind of settled down, and Jordan, Lieutenant Governor,
to jump in for a second, the delegate craziness that went on. The issue there is that the group of delegates who came to the convention under the presumption that they were going to be the delegates out of Macomb, they represented what some folks were calling a more moderate Republican view, correct? And the delegates that replaced them were representing a far more Trump-aligned, far more right viewpoint than the delegates that they did replace. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, the delegates that did the replacing were led by a guy named Mark Fortin. He led the Macomb County Republican Party until about April, when there was an uprising, and the sort of, I hate to call him less conservative, it's just, they just felt that Mark was mismanaging the party, that he was getting into some sort of like ultra MAGA, like conspiratorial kind of thinking. And they voted to replace him as chair. He went to court. A judge said, well, Mark's still the chair. So this new group led by a guy named Eric Castiglia technically started like a new Republican Party. It's a complicated stuff. We've reported on it extensively.
I mostly bring it up because it's interesting, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, regarding there seems to be two sides of a Republican Party that's going on right now. You have your more center-lined conservatives, and then you have your further right, more Trump-aligned conservatives. So, when we moved into the lieutenant governor pick, Simon, we vied for somebody, or I shouldn't say we, but the Republican Party vied for somebody who seemed to be able to bring a little bit more of legislative experience, a little bit more of a, voice in the room that can both play to grassroots and non-grassroots alike. Can you take us through a little bit about who Tudor Dixon ended up picking, former Rep. Shane Hernandez?
Yeah, I think that this convention itself is very emblematic of something that the Republican Party has gone through since the early days of the Tea Party. That sort of there's been this ongoing tension between sort of establishment figures and more insurgent grassroots individuals. And each convention, there's been sort of a process of sort of taking this wound and cleaning it and redressing it. At times, this has happened more behind the scenes, and at times this has been more public. This convention was expressly public, and I think that Hernandez was really a strategic pick because he's someone who has grassroots credentials. He came up through the Tea Party, especially in his I believe St. Clair County. He's from Port Huron, and as a result, they thought that they could sort of kind of have it both ways with Hernandez. And there hasn't been a loud outcry about his decision. But I think that's in large part because one of the grassroots favorites from the gubernatorial election, Gareth Saldano, opted not to seek the lieutenant governor nomination at the convention. Ralph Rebant, who is similarly, you could say, grassroots oriented, quite a bit more conservative than Tudor Dixon herself, decided he would seek it, but it never got to that stage where there was actually a choice between Hernandez and Rebant. And so as a result, Hernandez is someone who was initially kind of iffy or actually against Trump, but has come to embrace him and sort of the policies that he stands for. And so I think this is an extension in many ways of Tudor Dixon's attempt to sort of have it both ways, to make decisions, make choices, crucial choices within her candidacy that can appeal to the Republican establishment, but also don't sort of discredit her with the grassroots. And I think that, this has sort of been the tenuous tightrope that she has walked throughout her candidacy.
Well, and then you mentioned the have it both ways thing, and I think that there's no better way to illustrate it than after the convention last Saturday, there was a quote unquote after party that occurred on the Capitol lawn, and Dixon and Hernandez gave their first public remarks as an established lieutenant governor ticket. And in those remarks, or I should back up and show what's on the screen, she's sitting there right now with Virginia's Governor Glenn Youngkin, who notably, obviously, was elected trying to play this middle of the road playbook where he wasn't trying to entice Trump to come and campaign for him, but was also trying to push a little bit of his thoughts and concerns that the grassroots had. And Dixon had an interesting comment regarding that when she took the stage to deliver remarks on that very topic. If we can get the clip to play.
How about maybe even we like Florida or Michigan? Parents' rights and education, motivating police officers to come to the state. How about we encourage teachers to come here too? Let's bring Michigan back.
So Ben, obviously, like Simon pointed out a second ago, Tudor Dixon trying to have it both ways, have her cake and eat it too. What are we looking at insofar as her policies, and how is she kind of walking that tightrope of courting grassroots while also courting more quote unquote establishment Republicans?
Yeah, so she's not going full on in sort of Trump world. You've seen maybe see some governor candidates across the country, notably Arizona, a woman named Carrie Lake. They're really hammering the Trump lane, and Michigan is a purple state, so she has to appeal to the sort of Trump Republicans and then some normal but traditional Republicans. And one thing that she's really trying to push, it's probably her top campaign issue right now to appeal to a wide variety of voters, is education. Everyone loves their kids. Everyone wants to have efficient schools that are good for their kids. And she has a education platform right now. And I'll read some of the bullet points. Use some federal COVID money to fund tutoring for every Michigan student, requiring school districts make to parents all curriculum and teaching materials public, banning sex and gender teaching from kindergarten through third grade, which is something that we've seen Republicans across the country sort of hammer on, is sort of the cracking down on what they call is inappropriate sex and gender education. She also wants to bolster civics and financial literacy requirements. And then one thing that Democrats have really hammered her on in the past week is that she wants state education funding to go to private charter, virtual, and homeschooling options. So it's kind of taking taxpayer money and then being able to help out private education initiatives. And that some Democrats that I've talked to today, that they say that that's a big no-no. That's, that they don't like that a lot at all.
Yeah, I think that this really sort of reflects what this candidacy has been about. And they've never really been shied away from, disclosing Dixon's campaign, that is, what they want to model their run after. And that's really sort of an amalgam of Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and Glenn Youngkin. Ron DeSantis was sort of known and sort of came up in part for his sort of Trumpian sycophancy. He was on Fox News constantly praising the president, managed to earn his endorsement, and then has really leaned in hard on culture wars issues, and is really willing to sort of curry popular support doing that. But then his policies haven't always reflected some of his talking points. They have at times, but a lot of his fiscal policy is really more in line with populist measures and is more moderate. I'd say Glenn Youngkin is similar in that regard. He really is, as Ben noted, really sort of laser focused on education in his candidacy, and really that allowed him to eke out a win against a very formidable opponent in Terry McAuliffe. And as a result, I think really sort of did something of a political masterstroke there. I think that if Dixon is able to combine these sort of traits into a single candidacy, it can be a powerful threat, but that really remains to be seen.
So Simon, I kind of want to go into detail a little bit more on that, because you and I worked the Democratic convention, I believe it was about 2 weeks ago now. And there it was a bit more harmonious, I would say, which obviously is easier to say when you are the incumbency. There was nobody going to run against Jocelyn Benson or Dana Nessel or Governor Whitmer. But obviously with the kerfuffle that Ben has detailed for us that occurred last weekend at the Republican endorsement convention, I'm guessing if moving into this gubernatorial, the final stretch of the campaign season, what, if anything, can we kind of garner from how we saw these two different conventions play out publicly?
Right. I mean, I think that really while Democrats are presenting a united front, I think that Governor Whitmer also has a difficult role to play. She really has to pitch herself towards the middle, which she showed in 2018. She can really do an excellent job of and appeal to independent and moderate voters with sort of kitchen table issues. And then at the same time has to sort of help a down ballot moderate legislative ticket in hopes of perhaps potentially becoming majority in the Michigan Senate. The Michigan House is much less likely, but this is sort of a target that they're shooting for. While I think Democrats have done a good job of presenting a unified front, I think that they still have a lot of headwinds. I mean, there's quite unpopular Democratic president in the White House. And although they just passed sort of landmark legislation that was sort of a key legislative achievement for the Biden administration in the Inflation Reduction Act, I don't necessarily think that they're doing an effective job of communicating what the benefits average people might see from that package of legislation to voters. And I don't know if they're going to necessarily have an impact with them on that. While the economic situation is improving and those headwinds might be lessening for Democrats, this is still something that Whitmer has to fight against. But luckily for her, she hasn't had to deal with the intra-party tensions that Dixon has and the fraught process of finding a lieutenant governor. She really, in terms of how smoothly things have gone within the Democratic Party, it's really been a massive boon that Dixon hasn't been able to enjoy.
Well, and luckily for her as well, I believe you reported earlier this week, she's enjoying something like a 27-1 lead financially against Tudor Dixon. We just got back the first post-primary financial reporting requirements this past week. And Simon, you crunched the numbers and they were pretty eye-opening, I'd say.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Whitmer campaign has a formidable political operation on the scale that has never been seen in Michigan politics. And so having $14 million cash on hand to Dixon's about $500,000 really sort of sets the landscape that this is financially an enormous uphill battle. without sort of from what I've heard talking to sources, without sort of a red wave in November or I guess a third party coming in, a patron, not unlike the DeVos family, but willing to spend millions and millions of dollars to make up this funding gap. It's a difficult outlook for Dixon as a result, because she can't get on the airways in the same way that Whitmer's campaign is able to. She's not able to define herself in the way that Whitmer is very much already defined as a candidate. She can drive home the issues that matter to her, the governor that is, with all the money that she has on the airwaves through this advertising. And Dixon won't have that ability. Essentially, she can be defined by Whitmer before she has a chance to define herself without this money.
Exactly. And there were, I believe, 2 proposed debate dates, to just jump ahead and look at what this means for voters. There are 2 proposed debate dates, Simon, I believe both of them being in October. And at that point, I believe the Dixon campaign was arguing that it's a little late for that, and that they want some debates coming out in September, which is this month. For those of you who just realized, like me today, it is September and the summer has flown by. So I guess what are we kind of able to again garner by the fact that Dixon is sort of letting herself be defined by the Whitmer administration, and how important is it that there are debates in the coming months, especially before you have the no reason absentee voting?
Right. So when you listen to Whitmer, Whitmer came out with an email suddenly saying that she had agreed to debates with 2 hosts on the days of, I believe, October 13th and the 24th. And their sort of rationale behind this is in line with tradition and how debates have been scheduled in the past. Obviously, the unsaid thing here is that in the 2018 election, we passed the allowance of no reason absentee voting. And so as a result, people are going to have ballots in their hands, or rather, ballots will be in the hands of local clerks September 29th, and will likely be in the hands of absentee voters not too long after that. And so Dixon's argument, and then it sort of had a rival press release come out soon after, is that she wants earlier debates. She wants these debates to be before ballots are in the hands of voters, before early voting can start, so that she has a better chance to define herself. And this is largely a symptom of having a lot less money. She needs this visibility in front of voters so that she has an opportunity to tell people what she's going to be about. I mean, not a lot of people watch gubernatorial debates. It's not the same as spending, say, $10 million in broadcast advertising, but a gubernatorial debate can help to sort of state what you're about, and for those who are politically engaged enough to watch, really sort of leave, hopefully, a lasting impression on them. But the thing is, Whitmer and Dixon have yet to agree on debates. We don't even know that there are going to be any debates this cycle, and as of now. And the thing is, Whitmer really, it's not to her political advantage to have an early debate. She's essentially, by having an early debate, she's giving a gift to Dixon. But I think there's also larger, broader democratic questions here, right? Do we want, is it important that we have debates before people have ballots in their hands so that we have a more informed electorate? I think that these are also relevant questions. I think the voters in general, I think I could say this without being too biased, deserve to have debates, to hear from the candidates themselves and hear what they have to say. But it remains to be seen whether that's going to happen.
And so the gubernatorial debates aren't the only debates in question that are being negotiated or talked about right now. Ben, you've been covering both the SOS and AG, and out of there, the question of will they, won't they, especially in terms of the AG, is looking like a hard they won't for this campaign season, yeah?
Yeah, so the Republican candidates for Attorney General and Secretary of State for AG, it's Matt DePerno. He's a lawyer from Kalamazoo. He sort of rode the Trump election denialism train back in 2020. And Christina Caramo for Secretary of State. She was a poll challenger in Detroit in 2020. And she, even more so than DePerno, rode the election denialism train. She has said multiple times that she believes the 2020 election was stolen from Trump in Michigan and across the country, which is false. Audits and investigations have proved that false time and time again. But as for debates, on Matt DePerno, he was investigated earlier this year by Nestle's office in a alleged scheme last year to steal or take voting machines from some counties and then like analyze them like privately. There's some private experts in these hotel rooms. And Nestle's office has requested a special prosecutor on that. But we don't know the outcome of it. We don't know if it'll come before the election or after the election. But DePerno has challenged Nestle to debates. But Nestle said this week that she will not debate him because she feels that issue of her office investigating him would come up in a debate, and she can't talk about it. She says there are rules that the American Bar Association says that she can't make extrajudicial comments about it. So she said that debating DePerno would feel like a boxing match with one hand tied behind her back. So we won't see an AG debate this year.
And just to jump in for a second, she also, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, she mentioned that she wouldn't debate DePerno on top of that because of the fact that she did not want to give any sort of platform to DePerno to continue to engage in false claims regarding the 2020 election. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. She felt like his candidacy is not serious, and she just, like you said, it just doesn't want those to spread. As her Secretary of State, there's been some back and forth. Christina Caramo has been in talks with at least PBS to have a debate, but she called that she wants two moderators. She feels PBS itself is too liberal. That's it's the channel where Elmo is. So make of that what you will. So nothing definitive yet on whether Jocelyn Benson and Christina Caramo will debate. But considering that Caramo has said some pretty charged false stuff about the election and is running for Michigan's top election officer, a debate between these two women would be pretty interesting.
And then I guess just before I kind of pivot to one of the last bigger issues of this week, I just want to remind anybody who's tuning in that if you do have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in our Facebook chat. We will do our best to answer them if we have the time, especially if they are pertaining to any of the topics that we've covered this morning. But I guess Ben and Simon, whoever wishes to chime in, there was one more thing that was pretty big news earlier this week. I guess we'll actually start with Ben, considering you sat through it for roughly, 7 hours or so?
Yeah, something like that.
The Board of State Canvassers met this past week to certify 2 different proposals that would be placed on the November ballot. There's the Reproductive Freedom for All, which I feel like many people have heard of and are aware of what it seeks to do. And then there's Promote the Vote 2022. And before I guess we jump into what happened there, Ben, if you could just kind of re-up for people what those 2 proposals are dealing with.
Sure. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned earlier this summer, you probably heard a lot about that there's going to be a ballot initiative to put abortion rights into Michigan's constitution. That is Reproductive Freedom for All. It submitted its signatures in July. It submitted a record amount of signatures. And the Board of State Canvassers, which decides what goes on the ballot and decides if those signatures are valid, that board met on Wednesday to certify that proposal. It also met at the same meeting. Another ballot proposal, Promote the Vote 2022, went up to canvassers. That would do a lot of things with expanding voting rights and access in Michigan. Notably, it would put in the state constitution 9 days of early voting, like in-person early voting. Other states have that. Ohio has that. And then Jordan laughs because I'm came here from Ohio. But other things like the fundamental right to vote, it would let you choose to vote absentee for like the rest of your life, like in just elections. You wouldn't have to fill out a thing every election. But the Board of Canvassers met on Wednesday. It was a long meeting. There were hours of public comment. There were hours of debate between lawyers and questions from canvassers. And what it came down to was the board deadlocked 2-2. There are 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the board. The board deadlocked on both initiatives. On Promote the Vote, the challenge from an opposition group was Promote the Vote does not say everything that it would cancel out or change in the Constitution. One of the arguments they made is that because we're going to have 9 days of early voting, then election day will no longer be one single day like it is in the Constitution. And there are some other arguments. And then with reproductive freedom for all, there was an issue where when they were finalizing the ballot language back in the spring, they took a word out. And because of that, you ever go into like a Word document and things are either like left justified, right justified, centered, left aligned, right aligned, center aligned, or justified, where like the words fill up the entire page. So it seems like it was justified. It was like the justified typeface. And when they took a word out, there's now a few sentences where all the letters are like together. So it looks like just like one long run-on word. When you read it, your brain can kind of sense where the spaces are supposed to be. But an opposition group, which is a coalition of anti-abortion advocates, they argued that this is not fit for the Constitution.
I think they called it gibberish, right?
Gibberish.
Yeah.
And on reproductive freedom for all and promote the vote, the two Republican canvassers agreed with the challengers and said that there are issues that should keep it off the ballot. Reproductive freedom for all and promote the vote, they have appealed to the Michigan Supreme Court. They did that yesterday.
Not the U.S. one, just the Michigan one.
It'll now be up to the Michigan Supreme Court, which is 7 justices, 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans, to decide whether these make the ballot. And basically, the overall argument is canvassers did not have jurisdiction over that, over the arguments. Basically, it was their job to approve the signatures, which both got many more valid signatures than they needed. That the canvassers should have just been checking the signatures and making sure like the form was okay, that the content of it is not
that's definitely something that I want to kind of highlight for those watching is the Board of State Canvassers is not responsible for allowing or keeping things off the ballot based on their contents. They're pretty much almost secretarial, where they just make sure that everything is to form. And so the deadlock going to the Supreme Court, I believe they have until like September 9th to figure this out.
These proposals need to be finalized for the ballot for a week from now, Friday, September 9th. So the Supreme Court needs to act quickly. And just to put this in perspective, there was a lot of worry after Roe v. Wade was overturned earlier this summer that Michigan has a ban on the books. That ban is caught up in court right now. Abortion is still legal in Michigan, but reproductive freedom for all is kind of a silver bullet to ensure abortion rights in Michigan going forward. There was a poll released Friday by Epic MRA, which is an independent pollster based in Lansing, that found that about 7 in 10 Michigan voters agree with reproductive freedom for all. And that same poll found that abortion is the top issue among voters in Michigan this year. Education, like what Tudor Dixon has been pushing, infrastructure, fix the roads, government spending, gun violence, all important issues. But the most important issue for Michigan voters this year is abortion. And reproductive freedom for all, we're going to know in the next 7 days whether that's going to even make the ballot.
Now, Simon, if you could help us with a little bit of historical context for folks who are maybe clenching their teeth at home, biting their nails, saying, oh God, this is going to the Supreme Court. I mean, historically, what has that boded for ballot initiatives? Because as far as I can remember, most of the time the Supreme Court just, okays them as long as there's nothing substantially wrong with them.
Right. And I think in most instances that's the case. They really avoid trying to wade in on the substance of these proposals a lot. One example or one exception to this most recently was the 2008 proposal, Reform Michigan Government Now, which they decided was amending too many different parts of the Constitution. So as a result, violated the multi-instrumentation clause and couldn't appear on the ballot. I think that there's an outside chance that this might be raised and become a material issue in the promote the vote one, especially given that they're trying to bring up things like election day and other things that weren't mentioned in the original proposal. But generally, they've been pretty permissive in terms of what they want to allow on the ballot. The argument that promote the vote failed to discuss how many sections of the Constitution and as thus should be disqualified for that reason, though, really is an interesting one because it sort of expands the purview of the Board of State Canvassers, saying that the Board of State Canvassers can provide its own legal analysis, and if they disagree with the analysis provided by the proponents of a proposal, then they can chuck the initiative. And that, I think, is sort of an audacious claim. At the same time, really the issue with reproductive freedom for all is one about formatting. It's that these words were fit spaced too far together, and that's more within the board's purview. But I think that, having a really defined limit on the spacing between words is, and this is not the kerning of the words, but rather the tracking. I have to get that point in there because typography is important to me. But the fact that the words, whether or not the words are discernible and whether they have adequate spacing, is exactly the kind of minutia that the Board of State Canvassers is constantly dealing with, whether things have the right font size, whether they're legible. These are all sorts of things that have held up proposals or even ended some ballot campaigns in the past. And so I think that the chances for them being approved is probably pretty good, but it all remains to be seen, and we will learn, as Ben said, in the next week or so.
So yeah, I think that that's as good a place as any for us to stop for now. Just wrapping up this week in Michigan politics, and we may likely be back next week, especially with new news on Promote the Vote or the RFFA, what happens there. If not, definitely make sure to follow us on Twitter or keep up with us on MLive on our Facebook or again on our Twitter at MLive. But thanks again for tuning in. I'm Jordan Hermany. I'm one of our legislative reporters.
I'm Ben Orner. I cover elections, the Attorney General, Secretary of State, and more.
Simon Schuster. I cover the governor's office in the gubernatorial election.
I apologize for just throwing that at you guys, but thanks again for tuning in, and stay tuned.